Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending upon your time zone. Welcome to our webinar on first-party data and how you can leverage first-party data, how you can capture it, leverage it, why it's important, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the program risks and objectives. We'll talk about business value. We'll give you some definitions and some ideas to move this forward in your organization. Today I have Sana and Jackie, and I'm going to let you guys each do a quick thumbnail of yourself. So Sana, you want to give us a little bit of a background on who you are and what you do?
Yep. So my name is Sana Remicki. I'm the CEO and founder of Consia. At Consia, we're basically a SaaS platform that helps mid to large enterprises power personalized and multi-channel experiences on top of siloed and fragmented tech stacks that may include both legacy, homegrown, as well as modern and cloud-based content and data sources.
And I know we crossed paths when I read some of your stuff, and it was very analogous to our thinking. So I was glad to see that kind of approach being leveraged by other organizations. So I was really positively encouraged by your use of some of those same ideas, or coming to those same ideas in terms of how to really leverage digital body language and create those personalized experiences and so on. And Jackie, how about yourself? You want to give us a quick thumbnail of who you are and what you do?
Sure. So I'm Jackie Russo-Anderson. I'm the Chief Customer Officer at BlueConic, and we are a Boston-based CDP focused on putting unified, actionable data in the hands of our growth-focused users. So excited for this conversation.
Terrific. That's great. So just a little bit of housekeeping. We are recording, as you probably came in. We're going to shoot for maybe 50 minutes and have some time for Q&A. We'll see how that evolves. If you have questions, you can certainly put those into the Q&A panel. And I do want to thank CMS Wire. CMS Wire and Simpler Media provide some great resources, and they are our media partner here. So please visit their site. And we do appreciate your input. So we're going to have a survey at the end, but we're also going to have a couple of polls. So please feel free to participate in those. So let's start off with some definitions. We're going to talk about first party, second party, third party, and one I find a little controversial, in my opinion, is zero party data, but we'll talk about that. We'll give you some definitions so you're aware of the buzzword compliant talk that's out there. We'll get a poll for where you are in your journey. Then we'll hear from each of our panelists, including myself, about our perspectives, kind of what the bottom line is, what you want to take away from this, how you want to look at this. We'll talk about business value, business outcomes, and then I want to hear about your risks. So we have a poll toward the end, and then how to manage program risks. What are the typical things that you're going to see in these types of initiatives? So let's go ahead and jump in. And again, I put in zero party after a discussion with Sana and Jackie to say, well, let's include zero party. I believe, I was saying the other day that there's two types of taxonomists in the world. There's lumpers and splitters, right? People that put things together in a bucket and look for commonalities, and people that split things apart and look for finer distinctions. And the question is a distinction that is meaningful? And so let's start with first party data. And that is information, that is stuff that you are capturing from your customer. And that can include things that are derived from your marketing ecosystem, right? It may not be something that a customer explicitly gives you, but it's stuff you can infer and derive from that digital body language for those interactions. Second party data is stuff that somebody sells, right? If you capture your first party data and you sell it to somebody, that becomes second party. Or if you're buying data from somebody who is originating that is second party. And third party is from aggregators, right? That's where we're starting to see some of the challenges around elimination of cookies and various regulations and so on, and compliance issues. And then, again, this whole idea, you'll hear people talk about zero party data. And again, my philosophy on this, and I'll hear from you guys as to why you think it's an important distinction. My philosophy is it's not necessarily meaningful. It's saying, what are we asking for from the customer versus what are we deriving? So it includes the stuff that's explicit from your customer, but not necessarily derived from other types of technology. So Sana, Jackie, argue with me on this as to why it's an important distinction, or if you agree that it's not distinction?
I can
It's just
take a
so
stab
much.
at it.
It's just so much, right?
So
Okay.
I guess I am in this particular instance probably going to disagree with you in the fact that it's not important to make the distinction. I do believe the distinction is important, and the reason why it's important is because of the current privacy landscape that we're all living in today. What zero-party data allows you to do is it's showing a little bit of respect for the customer. You're saying, look, this is what I'm asking you explicitly. You're telling me this. I'm not inferring anything from your behavior. And you can get, it's an opportunity for marketers to collect valuable, actionable, and ethically gathered information in a time where data collection is, fraught with its challenges and controversies, right? So it's not that the zero-party data is not a type of first-party data. It's just to make that distinction clear that there are important factors to consider when collecting data, and that's why that distinction becomes important.
Jackie, what are your thoughts? Do you think it's important?
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm team for zero-party data too, but I think Sana brings up really great points, and I think the other way I think about this is from a customer experience perspective. When you're thinking from a customer-centric perspective, you need to think about what data am I collecting from customers, how am I collecting it, and figuring out like what level of transparency do I want to have with them around that. And it's a really important element of zero-party data is being transparent, but also recognizing that the data that customers are giving us allows us to give them something in return, right? It's a better experience, it's better product recommendations, whatever it might be. And so when you engage in them with that level of transparency, I think that's an important part of the overarching customer experience.
Why is it important for us to distinguish for the purposes of our customer interactions to say, well, here's data we're going to get from you directly, but you know what? There's other data we're going to infer. In other words, what does that label and that distinction tell us or tell them?
I have one other point.
Sure, please.
I don't think that you're ever going to tell the customer that I'm collecting first-party data or second-party or zero-party from you. So it's not really a term that you engage, with your customer with. It's more of a discussion when you're strategically trying to figure out how exactly you should engage your customers within your own organization. You're making that distinction, or within a bunch, like in a panel such as this, you're making that distinction. The customer, you're just asking them questions about themselves. They answer those questions. You don't need to label it at all for them.
Okay, that's okay, great. That's good. When we discuss it internally, what is the distinction? How does it impact policy? How does it impact data collection? How does it impact how we use it? How does the distinction help us make a decision? And
it's just to have a better conversation. It's an easier
nuanced
conversation.
A more
It's
nuanced conversation.
Exactly. So you don't have to explain, the terminology before you're speaking. It's common vernacular that everybody understands without having to provide, explicit definitions. I think that's really all it is.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead.
From an application standpoint too, if you think about it, right, from first-party data collected on a website, we might see that somebody is buying a lot of, sweaters, right? And every time, or the majority of the time that they're coming to visit us, they're buying sweaters. So we think, okay, they are really interested in sweaters. We develop predictive models based on that first-party data. And so now we're targeting them. But maybe we send them a survey and come to find out for themselves what they're really interested in purchasing are dresses, right? And we wouldn't have gotten that from the first-party data that we're collecting. But now we know the sweaters that they're buying really aren't for themselves. They're super interested in our dress collection. And now we can send targeted information to them that's really appealing and might convert them as a buyer on that category that we wouldn't have gotten to otherwise. I mean,
I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a really good point.
That certainly makes sense.
To Jackie's point, I really like how she shed some light on, how you would potentially use that data differently. Like if you're looking at let's say an AI model that is going to decide, I have this data, behavioral data, and I'm going to make some inferences from that. And I have some zero-party data, i.e., this customer's actually explicitly told me that this is what they want. What's going to be prioritized? The zero-party data, not the first-party data in that case, or not just generally any first-party data. It would be that explicit data that the customer themselves have told you. So that takes priority. So, when Seth, you were talking about how you would potentially use that distinction in building experiences or building policies. I think the distinction here would be that you would want to prioritize what the customer has explicitly told you versus what you're gonna derive from their behavior and interactions.
Okay, fair enough. Let's get into some more acronyms and buzzwords. So CRM and CDP and DMP. I was almost throwing in MDM to further throw into our acronym soup. But people are saying, well, what is a CRM? What is a CDP doing for us, right? And because I have a CRM, so do I need a CDP? What's a CDP versus a CRM? What's a DMP, which was really the way of thinking about that. And so I put some definitions up here. CRMs are really the sales and service interactions. Many times they're human-centric, right? They include purchasing behaviors, but it's really documenting how we're interacting, how we're serving the customer, how we're selling to the customer, and so on. And and again, it records those relationship details over a long lifespan. If I go to the next category of data management platform, many times data management platforms, DMPs, are used to consolidate third-party data and other sources for segmentation and targeted advertising. Again, it can include some internal and some external. It started to get a little fuzzy the more research I did. I have not deployed a DMP. We have done work with CDPs and CRM, of course, but the DMPs were really more focused on audience management, targeting, segmentation, and many times because cookies had a shorter lifespan, they really were looking at snapshots in time and not necessarily longer time frame. And then we get to customer data platforms. I talk about the digital body language of the customer, right? Across that whole ecosystem, multiple internal systems and external systems, whatever people are interacting with, that provides some kind of a signal about what they're doing, and integrating multiple sources. So you could have a CRM and a CDP that are and a DMP providing signals for your CDP, which then can interact with other tools to orchestrate that experience. What do you guys like or not like about these definitions?
I think the definitions are okay at a high level. What I would potentially
just got an okay, right? Just got to pass.
They're okay. They're good.
They're okay. They're okay. We're meant to be the end all be all, but go ahead.
So I think that you've kind of captured a lot in very few words within each of the definitions, and I think there are some nuances around how exactly, for example, a CRM and a CDP are different. DMPs, most people believe as kind of different beasts altogether, but there's always confusion between the CRM and the CDP space. If I have a CRM, why do I need a CDP? And I think the biggest differences between those two are the ability to capture that behavioral data that you can get from digital touch points, such as web or mobile or email interactions, etc., that you're automatically or programmatically collecting. That's one thing that CDPs can do very, very well that CRMs cannot do.
And just to get definitions, that's what I'm calling digital body language, right? It's those from those different systems. So,
those interactions, exactly.
Correct.
Exactly. And the other thing that CRMs typically don't do is the unification or aggregation of data from various systems or various backend sources that have customer data, and bringing that all together and making sense out of that information so it can be shared, which is a third main difference, is the ability to share that data with, through APIs or other means with the rest of the MarTech stack.
Right.
So I would say those three are the main distinctions between the CRM and the CDP. And if there's any confusion about why you need to go with one versus the other, CDPs are really the superset of capabilities. That's all I would say. Jackie, do you have anything to add?
Any other
to that?
nuance, Jackie?
Yeah, no, I think you clarified the point on digital body language. And Sana, you kind of riffed on that really that CDP is about bringing the information together, and what that information is going to look like really depends on where you are as a business and the data that you have access to, what systems that lives in, whether it's online, offline, but really kind of pulling it together to create for us the unified profile that becomes the center of it. And I think we'll talk a little bit about this later, but the idea that you need to have certain systems to do certain things in place, or certain systems in place to maximize a CDP, is, I think, a fallacy too. I think it's really more about, like, what are the business objectives? What are you trying to get at? What data do you have to start with? What can you add? And really thinking about the business case behind why you might need to use these systems, and then why you might not need to, right? Why you might be able to evolve away from many of them.
So we have a question or a comment from Michael Schrage. Thank you, Michael, about why we're not talking about metadata as a means of distinguishing these. And my perspective, and you'll see in my next couple of slides, is it's all about metadata. So when we look at the metadata models, and I'm going to hit on that very shortly, we do have metadata models that are living in each of these systems, and the CRM has models of the customer that include attributes, isness and aboutness. Who is this customer? What type of customer are they? And what are the other descriptors around that? And the CDP is actually aggregating that metadata from multiple sources. So there may be a descriptor or definition of a customer in an email management system that that descriptor may not be in the CRM, right? Or it may not be, in a web application, right? It may be specific to campaign management or email marketing or something along those lines. And the CDP is pulling that metadata in. So it is all about metadata. And thank you for that question, Michael. But let's continue on, and we'll get into more of those issues around metadata. So thank you for that input. And I'm glad we did not have too many disagreements there. Let's have a poll right now just to see where people are at. Where are you in your journey? Is it not on the radar? Is it just getting started? Do you have programs that are in flight but limited, or are you really leveraging things to get those internal efficiencies to do things like personalization and segmentation? Getting that single view of the customer. There's a lot of different pieces to this. So, and if it's none of the above, maybe you could let us know in the chat. So right now, we're seeing, nobody is saying it's not on the radar, which is good. A number of folks are getting started with their investigations, and it looks like a small number are leveraging this pretty efficiently. Okay, they're getting more responses, so let's keep going here. We got a couple more. I'll give it, it's like popcorn popping, you kind of goes a little quickly, and then it starts slowing down, and then, people start smelling smoke or something like that. All right, I think the popcorn has stopped popping. So I think we can end that poll and go ahead and share it. So everybody says this is on the radar. This is, majority are getting started. A number of folks have limited POCs. And then for the none of the above, just let me know in the chat or in the Q&A. But that's interesting. So great. Oh, we didn't share results. I'm sorry. Did we share results? I don't know whether it shares it when I'm seeing it or not. So did you guys already see it?
Yep.
Okay, great. All right, so I'll stop sharing that. Thank you. Terrific. Let's keep going here. And what we want to, okay, Michael. Thank you, Michael. I was just looking at this. So Jackie, you're going to give us your bottom line here, and you're suggesting your bottom line is that they're not just necessary, but they're really transformative. Do you want to talk more about that? And I'll just go through some of your slides here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I do think that, the important thing to consider, as we've talked about, the way that CDP is collecting data and the things that it can do is really a transformational investment for companies. And The way that we see it is we're kind of focusing on 3 key trends with customers. These are kind of the challenges that they're bringing to us as they're evaluating, do I need a CDP and what am I considering here? But I think the 3 big themes that we see, right, is that these factors are disrupting status quo as it is. And so, maybe any one of these things in a small fit, somebody might say, oh, okay, we got something going on here. I need to address this. But it's kind of like coming in at all angles. And so companies are realizing, all right, we need to do something about this. And probably the primary one is the shift from third-party to first-party data. So good to know that in the poll, everybody knows what first-party data is, which also means, I guess, that we did a good job of defining it in those early slides and didn't confuse people too much. So checkbox on that one. But this really has been the most notable in the context, I think, of Google's initial threat to deprecate third-party cookies, which, of course, send everybody into a little bit of spiral. And now we have a little extra time on when that clock expires, but it's also characterized by the changes that Apple has made and in terms of how they're capturing and sharing data within their ecosystem. And I think the broader reckoning with the reality that third-party data historically has not been very well aligned with consumer privacy in general. And so it really presents several issues in terms of consent and compliance with privacy regulations like GDPR and CCPA. So this is really a shift that's coming from several different directions, but it's really all pointed in one single direction, which is clearly the demand for a bigger focus on first-party data. The other one that we see is focus on increased business agility and resiliency. And this is one that was really kind of hyper-powered by the pandemic. And for many companies, if not all, the pandemic really revealed what was working inside of companies and what wasn't, right? Including the ability or inability, as it were, to adapt to rapid shifts in the environment. And that was incredibly problematic for a lot of organizations. When push came to shove and we had to kind of pivot on a dime, a lot of companies realized that they didn't have the tools in place or the information or combination of both to make those shifts. But those that were able to adapt quickly did so in ways that really created kind of a great divide in between them and their competition. And so as companies recognized that, they said, okay, we kind of need to get our ducks in a row on this front. And obviously, we don't ever want to see anything like, what we've been experiencing for the last couple of years now again. But the reality that comes out of that is that the world is changing from different important ways every day. And so businesses need to be able to capitalize on those dynamics, and the ability to do so is really a differentiator from a competitive perspective. So this one is really more about how a business works than anything else, and we'll talk about what that means in a little bit. I think the last one, I kind of hinted at earlier in the idea of customer experience, is really this customer relationship transformation. And that's really that broader transformation about how companies are interacting directly and indirectly with their customers. I think, I have some Forrester green in my blood from previous roles. And I think Forrester has been calling it the age of the customer now for almost a decade. But I think we're now really getting to that point where, a few companies and very few companies have figured out how to execute customer centricity at scale, but everybody else is recognizing that this is something that has to happen. And again, fueled by the recognition of kind of the disconnect as we went through some of the pandemic impacts. And so, if you don't have a first party data strategy, you're at a loss when it comes to being customer centric and being closely connected to your customers. And so that's really coming into the limelight as well. And I think the other element of that is how and what data you collect from customers should also absolutely be in sync with your broader customer strategy. So if we jump to the next slide, I think, yep, you got it. Nope, sorry.
Which one? Do you want the one,
yep.
This one for your company,
Yep.
for you? Okay.
So I think, if we take those kind of a level down, I think, failing to adapt to these major overarching trends, the way that we've seen it, has consequences both for the business writ large, but then also for, the team leaders and the decision makers who are considering a CDP more specifically. So for a company, privacy regulation violations that can rack up into the millions of fines, right? If you're not being compliant and you're not leveraging data correctly. For you as a practitioner, that can mean that legal is dictating your customer experience, which obviously is never a good answer or a good place to be in. Similarly, outdated tech and processes can thwart transformation. And then you see IT controlling, data independent of business needs, and there becomes a big divide, which is problematic. And then finally, that divide between customer-centric competitors who are able to have a pulse on what customers want, they need, they can pivot quickly. On the other side, those growth goals, if you don't have that level of view, can fall short. You're missing revenue targets, business outcomes fall short. So if you jump to the next one, that growth goals and the business objectives are probably the flashiest part of CDP recognition, right? We need to drive more revenue, we need to open new product channels, we need to maximize marketing. But I think the other element that we think about in CDP evaluation is really the operational efficiencies. And that's an important part of balance in the ROI of a CDP. So I know we'll talk a little bit more about ROI and return on some of these, but we use this framework, and I think a correct CDP deployment really transforms the way you operate across business outcomes. So it's talking about revenue elements, it's talking about operational efficiencies. So if you start right to left, if you started improving first-party data quality for business users, then you're mitigating end-to-end risk, you're allowing business teams to rely on fewer technical resources, which is great for efficiency, reducing time and steps from customer insight to action, making testing more smarter and more scalable, and then enabling timely and personalized cross-channel interaction. So if you're really maximizing how you're using a CDP, you can touch across all these elements. That obviously magnifies the ROI that you can return. I think just as a last point that I'll add is, a lot of times we get into conversations where people are like, well, I don't have a lot of first party data yet, or I don't have, access to all the tools that I want to connect to my CDP. I'm not ready for this yet. And we actually kind of think across three aspects of CDP readiness. So one is data confidence, data access, and data utility. And I would say one of the biggest things is not to make sure that on a scale of 1 to 5 of you're being ready, that you're in a 5 across all these categories, but more that you've done the assessment and you know where your gaps are, because then you can take, use cases and prioritize them and say, hey, actually, I don't have access to, whatever, my POC data yet. So I'm not going to prioritize that as a use case. Or, maybe my CRM is managed by a different team and I haven't built out that relationship yet. I've got to do that separately. So I think that that's a really important piece. It's not that you have to have all of your ducks in a row, so to speak, but you just need to know where your gaps are, so then you can prioritize.
Yeah. That's a great point. And I do want to say, there's actually something, and we did work with Project Management Institute, and there is actually something called duct alignment theory. That is a PMI construct. So, and I think the main point here is you're never going to be perfectly ready. I mean, people are not ready, right? You have to look at where you can make those incremental improvements, and you have to look at where you can have an impact and use that to kind of catalyze and justify and move things forward, as long as you can have a solid business case. Thank you, Jackie. That was great, great summary of those perspectives and a nice overarching framework. And so, Sana, you want to talk about connecting the dots?
Sure. Let's start connecting the dots. I love connecting the dots so much that I'm even wearing a polka dot shirt today.
Okay. There you go.
So,
dots to be connected.
So first of all, thanks, Jackie, for covering a lot of ground in a really, really short time that basically covered all of the reasons why CDPs are important. And why we should be thinking about building CDPs. My perspective is not so much on the why, because I think you guys have already done a great job on explaining that why. It's more about the how. A lot of times, people think about building or building or buying a CDP and collecting all of this data that is really, really good to have your unified customer view. That single customer view is all ready to go. But what do you do with it? How do you actually put that in practice? How do you activate that data? And my perspective is that in order to really create that personalized and meaningful experience with your customer, you need to be able to connect the dots between your customer, your content in every context. Okay, so those are the 3 C's that we care about when it comes to personalization. Your data may be coming, your customer data may be coming from a variety of different sources and give you a lot of different attribution and customer traits. So sources like email engagement, your CRM, customer service, real-time behavioral data, all of that valuable information that you're getting from all of these different sources is telling you something about your customer. And then you have your content, which is usually treated as a second-class citizen, I would say, in most organizations, which is also spread across. Yeah, if that, usually third. And it's also, spread across a lot of different sources. Sometimes these are legacy platforms, sometimes they're homegrown applications, databases, product information management systems. So it's literally all over the place. And when we think about personalization, a lot of people just talk about the customer. They just think about, okay, well, the customer wants this, so we should show them something that they want. Now, what is that something that you want to show to the customer? Can you show it dynamically without having to write a million rules for every customer in every context, right? So you need to be able to connect the dots in a way that is programmatic, that is algorithmic. And the only way, if you go to the next slide for a second, Seth, is if you have a complete data model of both the customer and your content, right? So your customer, you know where they're located, what devices they're coming in with, what are their affinities, right? So they like local, organic, humane, sustainable products, right? You know about them based on their interactions on the website or what they may have explicitly told you, like the zero-party data, or their category affinity. If you're on an e-commerce store, like I like beauty products or jewelry or fashion. So they've given you all of this valuable information. And now you have on the other side, your content. Your content could be products. It could be blog articles. It could be any marketing material or offers and promotions that you want to show to them. And that content also has attributes or should have attributes. And you should focus on making sure that attribution is there so you can make that connection between your customer attributes and your content attributes in a dynamic way. Some people will argue that, if you have AI, it should just figure it out for you, right? Well, that doesn't work that way, because even if you use AI requires data modeling and content modeling to be done in such a way that you can expose all of the facets and characteristics of both customers and your content, so it can figure out how to connect those dots for you. But without that data modeling, that's not going to happen.
There's a funny phrase I've heard in the industry called "there's no AI without IA."
Exactly.
No intelligence without information architecture. And
that's exactly it.
That is attributable to me.
That is a very good point, Seth. And that's exactly what we're saying here. My perspective here is, don't ignore the content. Customer is important. At the end of the day, customer data is what you're collecting about the customer. Content is what you're showing to the customer, right? And that content you need to keep in mind how that content will connect to the customer. And the only way to do that is to bring back to the point of metadata. It's all metadata. It's all about connecting the dots between all kinds of metadata of all of the entities that we're working within this within the landscape. So that's all I wanted to just add. Hopefully
that's great.
Makes some sense.
Sorry, going the wrong way here. No, that's terrific, and I'm going to reinforce that point in my piece here, because it is about building a customer data model, just as we build a content data model or product data model. So when you think about this, when we look at this whole world of data integration and customer data, we have all these different systems that have representations of the customer. An order management system has stuff like the customer details. E-commerce has that. But there's other pieces that e-commerce would have or throw off. You might get additional information about the click streams and about how they're interacting with the site. The CRM is going to have additional descriptors, and sometimes the way we're describing customers in the CRM may be different than how we're describing them in other applications. And then, of course, we have things like campaign management, the marketing asset management, marketing resource management. And then we have to make distinctions between, well, who is a customer versus who is a prospect, and what's an account, and who's a contact, and then how are we interacting at those various levels. And then we, of course, we'll have other tools and other systems, and support will have trouble tickets and information about the customer history and the challenges they're having, and so on. And all of these different systems really need to be harmonized and integrated. And the customer data platform will allow us to integrate those things across that ecosystem. So when we're talking about this world of customer and data and content and product information, it's really a very heterogeneous environment. And many times these systems have grown up independently, so they may have very different ways of describing the customer, or just the nature of those interactions are different. So when you start considering this, you're pulling attributes, you're describing the customer. I put this into two buckets of explicit or objective or applied, and then derived or subjective, or however you want to call it, implicit. But it's also slower moving and faster moving data, right? Something about the customer's industry will not change very quickly, or their firmographics or demographics, whereas how they're interacting on a website is going to change very, very quickly, right? That's very dynamic data. And so when you think about the different systems that I showed you in the prior diagram, you're going to get attributes from those systems. So you might have in your order management system things like master data or account details, billing. You have support. Support may have some of that as well, but it'll have other attributes and other descriptors. Maybe it's going to have an as-built type of a diagram or a bill of materials. E-commerce may have others. And again, this is not to say these are exclusively coming from these systems, and this is just for example purposes, but there may be overlaps between these different systems. And again, they could be consistent or inconsistent. Again, campaign management is going to give you a different piece. Maybe we are mining social media interactions in our campaigns, in our social media campaigns, or we're monitoring those. And again, CRM is going to have other pieces. And then I put in the all-encompassing, et cetera, right? So all of these things are coming from different applications, and we have to build out those metadata models in addition to the customer and the content, but the product data as well. And so when we kind of look at that, I call this high fidelity journey map. And there's journey maps, but a high fidelity journey map looks at that customer journey in metadata terms, right? We understand that journey, and at each stage, depending upon where they are, that will change their metadata model. That will change how they're being represented in these different systems, right? So at each stage, this is the first party data. The first party data are all of those attributes that are coming from those different systems. And we can kind of put this into a journey and say, well, how does this really work, right? We have fast moving metadata and slow moving metadata. The slow moving metadata will be part of things like, the industry that they're in. I call it static here, but it's slower moving. Industry, role, their interests, right? That's not going to change day to day. And then we have faster moving metadata, the things, the campaign responses, the click-throughs, the recent purchases. And as we go through our journey, we change that metadata model, that fast moving. When I download a white paper, it actually impacts my metadata model, because now I can say, here's a signal. They expressed interest in this particular product or topic. And so I'm downloading this white paper. Our customer data platform is going to register that, right? It's going to say, oh, this person has downloaded a white paper. Let me now influence or impact the content management system and the product information management system so that I can give them the right information, recommend another product, recommend another white paper, or whatever that might be. So the CDP is the traffic cop, right? It's acting on these signals. And as we go through each step of the journey, you can kind of see up here that it changes that metadata model. It changes that fast moving metadata model. So that's kind of the idea of, putting these things together and saying, how do you impact what you're presenting to the customer during their journey? And this is how it's done. It is aligning that metadata, as Sana said, with the metadata of the content and the products and saying, what does this signal mean in terms of that interaction? So let's jump on propensity versus signal. So here's another good question. So propensity versus signal. So I would say a signal goes into a propensity model. So when we say propensity to buy, propensity to be open to a cross-sell or an upsell, propensity for, you know, to convert or to defect, right? Propensity models say, what is this? What are these signals telling us? And I think the signals come together to inform the propensity model because it has to tell you something about the customer's intent. Do you guys agree with that? Would you have anything else to say about propensity versus signals? Signals are an input to the propensity models.
Agreed. That's how it works. You collect a bunch of signals and you input them into a propensity model or an advanced analytics type of algorithm that would compute affinities or propensities based on the signals that you've provided it. But one thing that I would add is there are different types of propensities, and
is propensity itself a signal? Yeah, go ahead. It
can actually be a signal. It can act as a signal as well, because if you are looking at personalizing the experience of the customer, you maybe you have a specific offer for a customer that has the propensity to churn, right? So you want to retain them. So in that case, propensity itself becomes a signal
on which
exactly on which you can act. But in order to create that propensity model, you need more raw signals of interaction and transactions from your customer.
Yep. Makes complete sense. Let's talk about business value. I know we're coming up to quarter of, so we want to try to get some more questions. So, by the way, thank you, Michael, and anybody else who has questions during the talk, please feel free to add those into the Q&A panel. So when you guys see this, what are the typical objectives and how do you measure value? So what are you guys typically seeing? Where do organizations start and what's kind of the low-hanging fruit around business value? Who would like to take that first?
Yeah, I can jump in here. I think thinking back to the slide I had shared with the ROI at the center and kind of the 6 elements and factors. Any part of that is usually where we see people come in. It really depends also on like the 3 factors of readiness that the customers they have. So it's like which stakeholders within the organization are kind of spearheading the CDP initiative. That's going to influence what the business objectives are.
Who's the readiness? Yeah.
And then within that readiness framework, depending on what data you have access to, how usable it is, those things are also going to impact what you're focused on. But for example, we'll see customers who are coming in and trying to focus on minimizing the utilization of third-party data, right? That's obviously a big one right now, one of those core pillars that we talked about. So they'll look at, okay, where am I using third-party right now throughout my customer funnel? At which touch points can I, remove that reliance on third-party data and swap it out for using first-party data?
Okay. So I just pulled up your slide just to refresh our thinking. And Sana, do you want to add to that?
I think I'm on the same page as Jackie here as well. The only thing that I would add, more specifically speaking, the kinds of initiatives that we're seeing that customers are focusing on right now are either website or mobile personalization or sending more personalized emails to their customers. So those are the 2 that we're seeing every single time. They start with that, and then there's many other things that you can do with the customer data. But the first step is really just providing a better experience to their customers. And I agree. Some of our customers are using third-party data currently, and in today's privacy landscape and all of the challenges that presents to them, they're hoping that instead of using the third-party data to create those personalized interactions, that they can do it with first-party data.
And so the value you're seeing is the uplift from personalization, improved campaign responses, improved
Exactly.
impact, uplift of revenue. And Jackie, would you say that's a reduction in the third-party data costs is one of the first drivers you're seeing?
I don't know if I'd say first, but I think it's one of the elements.
Okay.
But again, it's going to depend how value is defined is really what their business objective, or we focus on use cases. So defining the use case that you're trying to go after is then going to determine how you're defining, ROI or value. I think the other element that we see that I had mentioned was the operational efficiency standpoint. So doing something like if we carry out that third party example, if you're no longer creating customer models with third party data, right? And you don't have to kind of create a segment, go to your media agency, have them build a model, charge you for it, then wait till they can activate it and get returns. You've created operational efficiencies because you're doing it in-house in, a day or two. You're not relying on the agency or their fees. And you generally see better conversion rates using first party versus third party data. So you kind of ticked multiple boxes on the return cycle.
Well, that's great. That's a great point. I used to find that a lot of organizations use their agency as their digital asset management system. So they were happy. They pick up the phone and say, we need this asset. And the agent's like, how do I do that? Yep, here it is, and charge their regular fee, whereas people should have been able to serve. So here's a whole bunch of these that, business objectives, business outcomes. We have things like 360-degree view of the customer for, cross-selling, upselling, personalization, as we mentioned, doing predictive analytics, which is going to give, and I have a couple of tables in the back of this deck that you guys will have access to that kind of talk about these in a little more detail. Orchestrating, the digital marketing experience and the technologies, harmonizing customer master data, regulatory issues, being able to respond in more real time. And I think these are maybe some of the, two sides of the same coin in many cases, right? The 360-degree view, single view of the customer, being able to personalize, responding. Those are all part of the same picture here. Anything else that stands out on this for you guys that you've seen customers kind of gravitate to, or the low-hanging fruit? And you've mentioned some of those already, but just want to see what else jumps out.
I think one thing that I think we also see, which is missing a little bit from here, and gets back to that kind of business transformation and pivot perspective, is the monetization of audiences, which becomes critical, like as the publishing industry is evolving so incredibly. And also we see it kind of on the retail side as well, thinking about, with all this data that I have and this insight that I've now gotten closer to, how can I convert that to a new revenue stream that might be outside of just optimizing the products that you get and creating a better cross-sell journey?
Right. One thing I would maybe add here is that the way I look at any digital transformation initiative is that it has two things that it does for you. One is a reduction in cost, and the other is, an increase in revenue, right? So what I would potentially do is bucket some of these into either reduction of cost or increase in revenue. Something like a regulatory compliance issue, that's reduction in cost. You're avoiding risk, you're avoiding cost there. But something like an improvement in customer experience or personalizing the customer's experience, that's more around, making sure that you increase that revenue. And so you could, if you start to think from that top-down perspective, you can start to consolidate some of these and reorganize some of these business outcomes into those buckets and almost create like an umbrella where the top is revenue, and then you keep going down and seeing how exactly are you going to increase that revenue, or how exactly are you going to reduce that cost. So for instance, consolidate and harmonize customer data, that to me is the bottom of that umbrella, because all of those objectives that you have require the consolidation and harmonization of that customer data, right? Or responding to real-time customer interactions is really just a way to improve the customer's experience, which is like saying, which is connected to the personalization.
That's right. That's right.
And, building the meaningful
Totally
experiences,
agree.
et cetera.
Totally agree. And, one of the things that's difficult, one of the observations that an attendee made was to inform content creation. So I think you're absolutely looking at the content that's appropriate for these customers when they are, providing these types of signals, and ultimately that'll inform it and give you insights, but it'll allow for automation at some point,
right?
Building those patterns. And it's
Right.
difficult to justify things that don't happen, right? Based on things that don't happen. So you say, oh, we avoided this risk, or we avoided this compliance issue, or this hit on our reputation. That's hard, because unless you have a history of saying, oh yeah, we got hit with this every year, last 5 years. By the way, let's, it's hard to justify. I know we're coming up to the top of the hour in a few minutes. So I do want to get one more poll out. And Sharon, do you want to go ahead and push this out? What do you guys say, the listeners, the attendees, your biggest challenges are? Technical deployment, because you're so fragmented, that could be a problem, right? Because even though the CDP is supposed to be able to, and Sharon, are these multiple choice, hopefully, but, or maybe if it's a single choice. So pick one, guys. And so I see underlying architecture, lack of expertise, business justification, organizational maturity. I mean, these are kind of the greatest hits of challenges that people will see with any type of a large scale or enterprise initiative. Leadership support, technical points, kind of a one of each, right? So it looks like all of these things are important issues for folks. So there's got to be that that understanding and expertise. You got to get people nodding their heads and saying this is important. We have to build that justification, that ROI model. We have to get leadership buying into it, because yes, it's important and it'll show ROI. The big thing is when these things are big and expensive or challenging or long-term, and this is a marathon, it's hard to maintain that vision and that support over time. And so, short-term objectives sometimes are not the best for these types of things, because they do require kind of a long life cycle. Let's go ahead and finish that. And it looks like we got a little bit of everything for everyone, right? So it's even across the board. Nobody said none of the above. So those are all issues, or if somebody did. Let's see. I'm just trying to scroll through and see if we have any other questions. I think we're in shape here. So let me go ahead and make sure you guys can see those results. Go ahead.
So these poll results are actually exactly what we generally see with customers too when they come in. It's a total mixed bag of what the biggest challenge is. So actually like that it fell out this way.
Yeah, and we actually have a readiness offering, EEIS does, and of course you guys would also probably be happy to consult with people to kind of help them understand their current state and what they're ready for, and help build a roadmap. So feel free to reach out for any of those things. All right, let's continue on. So we only have a couple of minutes. Maybe just make this final words, right? We have program risk, the usual suspects, right? The leadership, the buy-in, the long-term support. You have to do these things with quick wins. You can't just be, big happy package at the end of a year. Are there unique technical? Do you guys want to just talk about what out of this strikes you as most important?
I can take a stab at it.
Sure.
From a program standpoint, one of the challenges that I've seen organizations have is deciding whether to build or buy a CDP themselves. And that usually takes quite a bit of internal conflict, or causes a lot of internal conflict. There's politics involved in that. There's a lot of factors that affect that decision. But one thing that I would kind of leave with my thoughts around that is that if you're trying to build a CDP, there's hard costs, there's opportunity costs, there's time to market that you have to consider. You got to look at who is going to support what you're building. The people that you have in your organization are not going to be there 3 years from now. So you got to, look at a build versus a buy decision from that perspective. And also, who are you buying from, right? There's large, monolith, single vendor type of solutions out there that will all say they have a CDP. Pretty much everybody in the world now is saying that they have a CDP. But when you buy a CDP, it should be from a CDP vendor.
Yeah.
someone who actually specializes in being a CDP and have seen all of the various nuances and challenges of implementing one, and not just repackaging their
Right.
solutions to pose as a CDP, right? So you know, I'm definitely on the side of buy, but also very, very key is to ensure that you're buying from the right vendor who really understands this space, has done this before, and is not just, you know, faking it.
Jackie, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I would echo that. I think it's absolutely on the program front. I think the change management around a CDP is equally as important as, you know, kind of thinking about it from
Absolutely.
an infrastructure perspective.
Yep.
And I think sometimes that component is missed in the planning phase. So,
Mhm.
and I think
Yeah.
to your point, when you go in and you actually work with a CDP vendor who's coming at it from a best of breed perspective, they really want you to have a stack that can meet your business needs and make you the most effective. So I think those are great
And
points.
from the consulting and professional services side, I say get your data house in order and your information architecture and your business requirements, and then start going down that path. But thank you guys for your input and your expertise today. This was terrific. Thanks, Dave, for chiming in on the on the great debate back in the early slides, and the zero party versus first party explanation. And I want to thank everybody for attending. There is a couple of, I just promote my book, big pitch here for the book, sales pitch, blah, blah, blah. Go ahead and get a copy. It'll answer all your questions about anything related to anything at all. And you can reach out. And by the way, there are a couple of slides here that talk a little bit more about objectives and measurable outcomes in the deck that you can see later. And we will have Sana and Jackie's contact information as well. So we'll make sure we include that in our deck that we send out in the recording. Thank you, everybody, very much. And we will look forward to speaking with you next time.